So moving forward this afternoon, our next committee meeting is the Planning Committee, and that is chaired by Councilmember Anderson. So I will turn it over to her at this time.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Joining me today is Council members Dan Hamill and Holly Huffman, and we have one item in front of us today. The subject is a resolution to relinquish the easement recorded with the 1997 Dumas Avenue Street Variation Ordinance. On December 23rd, 1996, the City Council approved the vacation of Dumas Avenue between 39th and Lincoln Street. The ordinance number was 10792. The ordinance included a conservation easement to protect the wetland assumed to be in the proximity of the subject right-of-way. It is atypical for conservation easements to be conveyed in this manner. As such, the CE was not identified in the permitting documents for the development of 3815 Elwood Avenue. SEPA review was completed for the project, and a wetland delineation confirmed the wetland to be almost entirely outside of the vacated row. In accordance with local, state, and federal regulations, said wetland was filled and mitigated for off-site. Staff are recommending the relinquishment of the surplus easement. And I believe staff with us today would be either Sarah Ullman or Kim Whale, or both. So is there staff who would like to speak to this?
Yeah, good afternoon, Council. I'll kick these things off. I am joined with planners Sarah Ullman and Kim Whale today. Essentially, we're asking Council to pass a resolution to relinquish a conservation easement that was required with that 1996 street vacation. Unfortunately, the conservation easement was obtained without the benefit of a wetland delineation, and the wetland was later found to be on the abutting property and mostly not within the right-of-way. Today, we intend to show that the previous council's intent of no net wetland loss has occurred, and the easement is no longer needed. I'm going to turn it over now to planner Sarah Ullman to get into the details of it.
Yeah, hi there. Thanks so much for the summary. I think we touched on the big takeaways, that it's pretty atypical that conservation easements are recorded in street vacation ordinances like this. And for any finer details, I'll absolutely defer to our legal minds. But in 2017, when the development proposal for 3815 went through SEPA review, a wetland delineation was done by wetland scientists with Northwest Ecological Services. And they determined the category and the location of the wetland. And the category was a category 4 wetland, which is actually the lowest functioning of the wetland categories. And if I could do share screen, I think it'd be helpful to see City IQ. So the turquoise area is the delineation that was done in 2017. And there's another visual in the packet which shows the surveyed areas. So as you can see, it's really less than a fraction of a percent of the actual wetland that was located in that incorrectly mapped conservation easement area. And so as you can see, it's in the center of the development site where the project was proposed to be developed. So the Army Corps of Engineers authorized the filling of the wetland, and the city did too, and required mitigation occurred off-site within the city limits. And that off-site location was chosen because there wasn't a lot of opportunities to mitigate in proximity to this area due to the developed nature of that area. So the mitigation site was near Connolly Creek. And the mitigation area was surveyed and preserved via a permanent conservation easement that was recorded with the Whatcom County Auditor's Office. And the mitigation site is being actively maintained and monitored in accordance with the city and Army Corps approval. And that's why staff is recommending the relinquishment of the conservation easement, because it really never was, and it still is not, protecting a regulated critical area. And the environmental aspects originally intended to be preserved with that easement are being done so right now at an offsite location. So today, staff are requesting council to pass a resolution authorizing the mayor to sign the relinquishment document for this conservation easement. And I'm available for any questions, as well as my colleague, Kim Wheel. She may be best equipped to answer any technical questions related to our critical area ordinance.
Wonderful. If you could stop sharing your screen so I can see all council, please.
Yeah. Sorry, I've got 3 computer screens and I'm hunting.
There you go. Thank you.
There we go.
So are there any questions or comments from committee members?
I'll move to recommend approval of the resolution.
Okay. Before I call the vote, I actually do have a couple of questions myself that I will raise. So I think there's an area, I think it states that it's a little under 50 feet that are considered wetland that is within this easement area. Has that area already been disturbed and filled as part of, so it's no longer really in existence now, correct?
Yes, correct.
So denying it based on trying to preserve what's there would be a fruitless effort because it no longer exists. Okay. The other question is there financial compensation with the relinquishment of this conservation easement?
No. And I think Matt Stamps might have raised his hand to chime in more to that point.
Mr. Stamps?
Yeah, thank you. Matt Stamps, Legal Department. I've been working with planning on this relinquishment. One of the things that's in the memo but didn't get highlighted earlier, but it's worth mentioning, is that this conservation easement is likely not a valid easement to begin with. During the street vacation process, state law allows cities to unilaterally retain a utility easement, but not a conservation easement. So there is a statement in that street vacation ordinance purporting to retain this easement, but the reality is that's beyond the scope of a street to begin with. And so in legal department's opinion, not a valid easement. And so this was important. This is an important action to kind of clean that up. And so there's no compensation associated with removing this, what I would say is an invalid easement to begin with. And also, even if it were not, there's really no authority in state law to charge for relinquishing retained things like utility easements to begin with. So for those 2 reasons, there's no recommended compensation here.
My other question, I had concerns because a previous council felt it was important to create this conservation easement through this area. And somehow how it was documented or the ability to find that ordinance that I assume would have been filed with the assessor wasn't done when permits and all this work happened. I'm kind of wondering what the learning lessons are, because how can we avoid this in the future? Because the work has already happened. We had whether we think it's valid or not, a conservation easement in this area, somehow it wasn't picked up in this process. And I'm just kind of wondering how it fell through the crack and how in the future we'll make sure it doesn't happen again.
Oh, thank you. It's a very important thing to do to make sure that we have all the rules in place and we know what to evaluate development on when it comes forward. So from that perspective, this was one of those situations that is pretty highly unusual for us to maintain a conservation easement in the vacation. So we did know that the area had been vacated, and generally when you vacate that, it's shown up on all of our city IQ. It did that here as well. I think the key that ended up happening is that when we evaluated the proposal against our critical area ordinance, as we should, we required a wetland delineation to be performed, and that delineation actually showed that there was, it's a very, very small portion that's actually in there. And so again, I think the intent of the council was to make sure that there was no net loss in wetland functions here. And the applicant came forward, they applied for permits, they followed our critical area ordinance, and they were able to find mitigation and create even additional area someplace else. So we're actually making it, we're taking this lower quality wetland that was on site and not really within the right of way, and actually mitigating it in a much larger area in a better location. So, generally, we're getting more for our buck here, so to speak, than we would in the past. So in this case, it's something that we want to make sure that we have all of the documents in place. We see everything that's out there when we're doing development review. And I think this is just a one-off here. It's like Mr. Stamps mentioned, may not even be valid, and it's not something typical that you would find. Learning lesson for sure, and we believe we've rectified that, and we'll continue to do a full detailed review when it comes to analyzing our applications.
Mr. Mariner, you had your hand up?
Yeah, you raised another thing that I want to emphasize to council. Maybe it's obvious, but I'm not sure it is I sign off on conservation easements, dozens of conservation easements for protecting areas where mitigation has occurred, or protecting sensitive wetlands or buffers or streams. And there's always a separate recorded document entitled conservation easement, which would show up on title. So what happened here was, and I've never seen it before, was an attempt by council, instead of doing a separate conservation easement, they embedded it in a vacation ordinance, which is, as Kurt said, a one-off. We just don't do things that way. We clearly set out conservation easements and record them in separate documents so they clearly show up on title.
So that kind of brings me to my last question. And I'm just taking this opportunity because, again, it was a concern that somehow the way it was set up was not caught. Are staff looking currently to find any other potentially one-off that previous councils might have tried to generously set aside in the same manner so that we can identify those and make sure that they're categorized correctly through a conservation easement versus through a vacation, as this one was? I mean, I'm hoping this was a one, but if there's like 10 out there hanging and we have the same situation come up again, that would be a big red flag that we have some things to clean up.
I guess the way that I would answer that question is that what we've learned from this is that you need to go back in and read every single document that's associated with it. And so I think in this case, generally we're looking for conservation easements, or we're looking for other easements associated with it. And what we really need to do is go back in and make sure that we read all of the vacations. Whenever we're dealing with a vacation, we need to go thoroughly through that ordinance that is doing the vacation. And from there, just make sure that we carefully see and look and make sure that we're double checking everything in the future.
Thank you very much. Is there any other comments or questions from council? No. Seeing that, I will call the vote in support of the resolution to relinquish the easement recorded with the 1997 Dumas Avenue Street Vacation Ordinance. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Wonderful. So that passes 3-1, and I'll bring that forward tonight to council. End of committee.
Thank you, Council.